The Habs have a big dilemma to address this offseason, but there might be some positives and negatives to it. We'll talk about the center situation specifically and maybe some specific players that may or may not have a shot next year. And plus, we're going to get into Justin Barron and how this might just be a make or break year for him, so stick around for this edition of Habs Digest. Jesse, the first thing, let's talk about the center situation. It's something we've talked about a lot, but as the days go on in the offseason, it's becoming more and more of a concern. We haven't heard much on the trade front for some different Habs forwards, and we know that the center position in particular is kind of a logjam. And as Arber Basu said in a recent Athletic article, the Habs' biggest need is to shed a forward. They've mentioned Mike Hoffman. He said he thinks the Canadiens are likely to listen on a few others, as well as Christian Dvorak or maybe even Jake Evans. But look at that center position, right? Christian Dvorak, Jake Evans, and the Newhook and Dach signings over the last couple of years have added two natural centers to the depth chart that already includes four with Nick Suzuki, Dvorak, Evans, and Monahan. So you have six centers fighting for four positions. You know Suzuki's going to be that 1C. Jake Evans is kind of ideal for that 4C. So that leaves Dach, Monahan, Newhook, and Dvorak fighting for those middle six center roles, Jesse. It's kind of a blessing, maybe, to have all these guys, but it can be a bit of a nightmare from a roster construction standpoint. What do you think? Are you more positive or negative on this whole situation, especially since we haven't heard a lot about some movement of these players?
Well, I mean, it is good news when your biggest issue is you got too many forwards and you need to make room, which I definitely agree with. But interesting that Arber Basu kind of feels that this is the biggest need for the Habs. Last year, he felt it was a right-hand defenseman. Mm-hmm. So I guess Hughes and Arber Basu are kind of feeling the same way about the Habs in some ways. But no, it is true, and I think Christian Dvorak is an interesting trade target. Mm-hmm. And there has been a lot of rumors, right, especially since the Alex Newhook signing, just because I feel it's important for Kent Hughes to really look into this, because a lot of the guys that we brought up, like Newhook, obviously Dach, like these are guys we want in our top six, mm-hmm. And even though you could argue maybe Christian Dvorak's more of like a 3C, I think the likelihood of him getting traded rather than a Jake Evans, who's so perfect in that 4C, it's like we need to fill up some spots a little bit higher up on the lineup, right? Because these are good players and you need to put them in a position to succeed. But if there's no spot for them, obviously that's going to be detrimental to the team. Obviously, He offers a lot of experience, great on the face-off dot, but you have to think that we're going to need, obviously, to clear up some room. We have so many forwards, so many players basically just on our depth chart right now.
Yeah, the center position is very tough, and I think you bring up a very good point about Christian Dvorak, and actually the hockey writers would agree with you. There have been some talk about Christian Dvorak, including on a 32 Thoughts podcast. Elliot Friedman said, Christian Dvorak, it seemed like there isn't a role for him right now. They have so many centers, so it's a name worth keeping an eye on. You see, on paper it seems to be true, but St. Louis relied upon him a lot this season, right? Especially with Suzuki averaging over 21 minutes a game. Christian Dvorak ended up kind of playing a role of Suzuki light with 28 points in 64 games this year with a lot of penalty kill time, about 17 minutes average time on ice. I feel like that role is not necessarily filled with ease, right? We kind of say, Jake Evans is the ideal 4C, but is there a world where Christian Dvorak maybe doesn't get traded and sticks around, maybe even in that 4C role, or do you think that's kind of a waste for a guy who's making $4.5 million?
Yeah, no, we definitely wouldn't be able to have him in that 4C type of role, but at the same time, he does, bring some things to this team, but for me, I have to be honest, it's like I've never been a huge fan. I was always kind of expecting a little bit more. He had an amazing career in the juniors. He was absolutely lighting it up, mm-hmm. Put up some decent numbers, Coyotes, even with the Habs, like not terrible production, right? As we were pointing out, 28 points, in 64 games, like it's not bad production. I don't know about you, Josh. I always just expected more out of this player. I always wanted more, and I just didn't see it. Even though he's good defensively, wins the draws, everything else, but you could argue that it's still, a very good 3C, a guy that's still great to have on your team, But I feel that in Montreal, in this very specific situation where it's such a youth development, that ultimately, Kent Hughes, he's really going to want to put his fingerprints on this team. And, I don't feel like Christian Dvorak is really part of that big future. But I would like to ask you, Josh, like, in your opinion, if you're the GM of the Habs, like this offseason, are you keeping Christian Dvorak or are you trading him?
Man, it's it's so difficult because you got to think there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes because by all accounts, he's a quiet guy. He's a good locker room guy, and he does the dirty work when you don't even notice him most nights because he's not making mistakes, right? He'll play a penalty kill every now and then, make a nice pass. He's a solid offensive player, second only to Monahan in faceoff percentage on Montreal. So that kind of stuff, again, is not super easily replaceable, but I think you're very right. I think in a world where Montreal is really using this youth movement, I think some of these guys can turn into what Dvorak kind of does, right? Newhook has lots of potential to end up playing penalty kill. Dach as well. I think that it's not easily replaceable, but I think if you really want to do what Kent Hughes wants to do, have this youth movement, especially for a guy like Dvorak who's making $4.5 million, his services could be well used on another team, right? You got to think he's one of those guys that, as Montreal fans, we kind of complain about. You're like, he doesn't really do as much as we want, but you know some GMs are really coveting a guy that can eat up 15 to 18 minutes a night, play PK, and be over 50% on the faceoff dot. So I feel like they can get a decent return, and I think you should trade him, and I think you might be in the same boat.
Yes, sir, I am.
Yeah, it's interesting, but something got to be done. There's too much depth, and it's a big decision to make because it's not an easy player to get rid of, but you got to think if the right offer comes along, they might just have to pull the trigger. Let's get into the final topic of today, and that's a bit of Justin Barron. And this might seem out of nowhere, right? We're just not really thinking about Justin Barron recently. Like, yeah, we've been saying how much we love him, but realistically, Jesse, this is kind of a make-or-break season. Right, Barron's shown some flashes, and then this is from, I forget what the website is, but anyway, it's an article about Justin Barron, but they say the offensive side of his game is very intriguing, projecting him to maybe have 10 goals, maybe 25, 30 assists, and to me, that would be an insane season from, a 21, 22-year-old defenseman to have 40 points. But his defensive game, Jesse, and I know his outlet passing in particular was a big issue last year, and with the amount of defensive prospects, especially right-handed D with someone like Reinbacher and Mailloux coming up in the system, you got to think the pressure is on for this player.
It is, and I really think that this is going to bring out the best in him. And once again, this is what's so nice about having such a deep cupboard, full of prospects, because many, managers, even coaches like Jean-François Hull for the Laval Rocket, even Adam Nicholas, many others, actually very big on Justin Barron. They really believe, and we have to remember he's only 21 years old, and we have seen, some really great offensive flashes, and for sure those defensive issues are there, but I really have some faith in him to really come out this year and really play, because you're right, he's gonna have to make his move now, and it's a great point. Like, it's this year or basically not at all, or he's gonna have to find another spot, because Montreal, it's like, obviously we don't have the best D-core, but it's going to be very good in a couple of years, right? We're building up towards that, right? So we're not going to have room for that unless, he really steps up his game. But I do believe in his capability to be able to do that. So I'm definitely looking out for him to have a breakthrough year this year.
Yeah, I think so too. It's very interesting though, because as much as we hype up someone like Lane Hudson coming up, I know he's a lefty, but someone like Logan Mailloux or Reinbacher, these guys are far from guarantees, right? We can hype them up as prospects as much as we want, but the reality is they're not all gonna probably end up being these stars in the NHL and power play specialists, because we look at Barron, he's a guy that we kind of look at as being one of the power play quarterbacks. But we already have someone like Matheson, someone like Hudson who will probably do it, and someone like Mailloux who by all accounts has an insane shot. Even that role might not be there for Barron unless he really proves himself early, right? These other guys are still young. They're still prospects, right? We might be talking about this time next year, Logan Mailloux's going to really have to step up his game to take over Justin Barron. So it's a very interesting dichotomy, Jesse. I mean, we always talk about prospects being almost guarantees, right? We always imagine them as the best version of themselves. But, I mean, I feel like you're in the same boat as me, where I see a world where Barron does end up better than someone like Mailloux, and maybe even on the same level as someone like Reinbacher if all things go right. I feel like the potential might even be there.
You don't want to underestimate him, right? Again, 21 years old, has a great pedigree, playing for Team Canada. That chemistry also of having played with Cayden Guhle at that very big tournament as well, So it's something that you definitely want to be patient on, and you definitely don't want to rush, too much. Definitely going to just need to just stay the course, but it's for him to really take the reins this year. He's really having an opportunity in Montreal to show what he can do, so, but you have to feel that Reinbacher and Mailloux have definitely kind of surpassed him in the depth chart at this point, right? Right-handed fence, it's like when they're drafting a player like this, you have to know that that's definitely kind of encroaching on a spot that you have, right? Yeah. So, But again, this is what's going to really bring out the best. I'm curious to see what he can do, playing with the Rocket maybe a little bit this year, and then, maybe getting really showing that he deserves the time with the Habs, and really having a big season here.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? I mean, and I completely agree. I think Reinbacher and I think Mailloux are both already ahead of Barron in the 2 to 3 years from now depth chart. But at the same time, again, prospects are so unpredictable. You never know who's going to pan out and who's going to bust. And Barron's already shown he can play at the NHL level with some serious flaws that he can fix. So we'll have to wait and see, but it's a very interesting topic nonetheless. But that'll do it for this edition of Habs Digest. If you enjoyed, leave a like, comment, subscribe to the channel. You guys have been showing insane support recently, and we really thank you for every single one of you who's leaving a like, who's subscribing, who's watching these videos right to the end. I'm Josh Gosse for my co-host Jesse Poirier. We'll catch you in the next one.